I don't use Zoom. Let's see. So now
No, I can do it, and you can just tell me when to press the button.
you do that. That's much easier. It makes me feel more like important as well, which is nice. And I could do
Oh, okay. You
like
like
Chris.
ordering me about, right?
The next slide, please. I was just looking through the list, and there's a few names I've noticed I know as well. So it's nice to see some friendly faces.
Oh, anything.
Whilst you're just doing that, yeah, obviously, thank you for having me and Katie along today. It's really good to be able to see so many people and have the chance to talk a little bit about fundraising and volunteering. I think it's probably worth just saying that when we're talking about fundraising and volunteering, we're talking about what that looks like, I guess, at Marie Curie. And having spoken to many people across many different organizations, it probably potentially could look slightly different for you to what it does us. So I think this is a really good chance to kind of learn from each other as well and see what people do, what's successful, what's been successful for us, but equally areas we potentially may have had some challenges that you might have had as well. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, like if any of you off the back of this want to reach out, would like to kind of talk about any of the things that I mentioned, then my email will be shared at the end. So you're more than welcome to drop me an email, or you're also more than welcome to connect on LinkedIn. And I'm often happy to have a cup of tea over a chat on Teams to talk through anything with you. So just to introduce ourselves firstly, so I'm Richard Scott, I'm Head of National Volunteering at Marie Curie. And I've been here now for just over 18 years. I started as a community fundraiser in the beautiful three counties of Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. I then did that for about 10 years before becoming a fundraising volunteer development manager, which was probably the most long-winded job title in the world. And I did that for years covering Wales and the West Midlands. And then I've been doing this role now for the past 4 years. And I'm joined as well by the lovely Katie Grinter, who you'll hear from in a minute. And Katie, like me, has also been here for 18 years. She was also a community fundraiser for 10 years in an area slightly more north than me. And then about 10 years ago, she became a fundraising volunteer development manager as well. So I think we're both clearly very passionate about volunteers, and we have a lot of experience, especially, I guess, in the areas of community fundraising. And that has a real link, obviously, with the fundraising side of things, which is why we're here today to share with you what we do at Marie Curie and what we do with fundraising volunteers. Just a really quick overview to what today will look like. And as we go through, if anyone's got any questions, please do put them in the chat and we can pick them up at the end. There'll be plenty of time, I'm sure, to go through those. But essentially, we want to talk to you about what fundraising volunteering looks here and what it actually means at Marie Curie. We'll spend some time looking at some of the roles that we have here currently, the more traditional roles, I guess, that we have. But equally, we'll spend some time at the end of the session looking at some of the things we're looking at towards the future, obviously with all of the changes and the trends in volunteering. What does that look like for Marie Curie and what does that mean for us? And we'll spend a little bit of time as well just showing you what the value of volunteers is to us and kind of the impact that they bring and how that compares to what it used to look like before COVID and how we're learning off the back of that and trying to make changes as we go. So we can go on to the next slide. That's all right, please. Thank you. And that picture always makes me smile. That's our Ledbury fundraising group, and it's a group that I formed way back. Yeah, and it just for me it shows in one picture so much about what fundraising volunteering is. So yeah, so I figured to get us going, I'd just kind of bring you up to speed of what that looks like as a team for us. So I head up the fundraising volunteering team at Marie Curie. And was that someone asking a question, or was that just someone? No, I'll crack on.
Yeah, I think everyone can please make sure that they're muted.
So there are 4 of us within the fundraising volunteering team. So quite a small team when you think we've got around about 2,000 fundraising volunteers. You've got myself, you've got Katie, we've got another volunteering lead, and we've got a volunteering coordinator. And kind of my team's responsibility is to take a really holistic overview of all things volunteering. across all of our fundraising teams in our innovation, income and engagement department. That's been somewhat of a big change for us since last year when we went through a restructure, because we used to have much more responsibility of really hands-on development and support within local regions in terms of recruiting volunteers, in terms of generating recruitment plans and basically income generation. So it's really exciting now as a team that we get a lot more opportunity to kind of identify opportunities that we can do and how we can work with different teams within fundraising. But equally, and just as excitingly, that we have a lot more time to spend talking to different organisations, talking to different charities, and learning about what's happening elsewhere in the sector, and then trying to implement that and learn from that. So in simple terms, for us, fundraising volunteering is the volunteers who support us across our fundraising team. So I think for me and through my 18 years, like fundraising and volunteers have always been intrinsically linked. And I think I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day where someone was talking about how does that, I think like you, Mishko, talking about that real kind of link between the two areas of fundraising and the areas of volunteering. And for us, fundraising volunteering is any of those volunteers that essentially are volunteers who play a role in income generation at Marie Curie. Predominantly for us here, that's within our community fundraising team. Most of the volunteers that we have when we go through the roles in a minute are based within community fundraising. And I think that's just because other teams within Marie Curie, that within our fundraising remit, have never really kind of invested in volunteers. So I think when I speak about how our roles changing somewhat, a real key part for us is to start to look at, okay, we know we've got these fantastic opportunities within community fundraising, but what can we do elsewhere? How else can volunteers play a role in different teams, and how can they support Marie Curie and kind of raising more income and delivering more impact in that way as well? We have volunteers who support us in many different ways, and we'll talk about that in the next few slides. But a really quick way we've always tried to define them internally is that we've always compared them as registered volunteers and partially registered. And when we talk about registered volunteers, we're talking about people who have a more consistent role. They've got a higher level of commitment, and they're kind of more regular in what they do, whereas our partially registered volunteers are people that are more ad hoc. They have slightly less responsibility, and because of that, they just require a different onboarding process. I think it's probably fair to say across all of your charities as well, you've probably got exactly these two different types, and we probably all define them very differently. And they both bring huge impact to us at Marie Curie. But for us and the fundraising volunteering team, historically, and you'll kind of get this as we go through the next few slides, our focus has always been on those fully registered roles, and how we can kind of increase and grow our numbers in them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. The other way it's useful to define about how we see things at Marie Curie is the link between a supporter and a volunteer. So we don't class everybody who raises money for us as a fundraising volunteer. For us, the volunteers are those people that are raising money on behalf of us, and the people that are essentially have gone through some form of registration to do so. And as I said, that could be a full-blown reference check registration, like our fully registered ones, or it could just be we've collected their details and next of kin, so we know who they are. But what we wouldn't class as a fundraising volunteer is those people that are taking part in events for us, or those people that are doing what we call fundraising my way. I know in other areas it might be called do it yourself, or a variety of different words, but we always call it fundraising my way. Those people are fundraising, but we don't class them within our fundraising volunteering remit. And I recognise that may be different across charities, but that's just the way we've always looked at it for us. So I guess that hopefully very quickly and in a nutshell sums up what fundraising volunteering is to us. I think there probably really is no rocket science to it, and I've probably said nothing to you that you probably don't already know. It really is those brilliant volunteers who play a role in delivering income to us. I think maybe we're slightly unique at Marie Curie in that we've always had a specific team that lead on that area specifically. that sit within the fundraising team. So we're not part of the volunteering team at Marie Curie. We never have been. We sit within community fundraising, and our remit has always been about how we can deliver roles and deliver impact from volunteers. Our volunteer would be more responsible for those volunteers in care and services within our retail teams, and they would have a very different remit to us. And as much as we overlap and work closely together, I think having those two separate teams and having a separate to that has always allowed us to make changes quite quickly, and it's always allowed us to keep a real focus and a real kind of importance around that particular area of volunteers and raising money. And I think that's led to supporting us in the success of that as well. I am now quickly going to hand over to Katie, who is going to talk you through some of the roles that we have at Marie Curie. If you're able to go on to the next slide, please, Michelle.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So we're just going to spend some time looking at what we class as our registered roles here at Marie Curie that we recruit to support our fundraising. As you run through these, you'll notice that these are more the traditional roles that you've probably seen popping around, and we're very aware that they're not as popular as they used to be. So part of the remit of our team is how we can make them more appealing and how we can adapt and develop these roles so that we can continue to keep recruiting to them and raising the money that we need to from them. And then we can see how different volunteers getting involved, different ages and things like that. And we're getting to know like what our volunteer motivations are and stuff like that. So we always have a role that's appealing to them. So as Rich mentioned before, these would be the roles that we class as our registered roles. So these people are looking after, have got access to data, they're cash handling and that kind of thing. So we go through the onboarding process with these where we obtain the references that we require and go through quite a much fuller induction with them as well. And Rich mentioned the other types of kind of partially registered roles that we have, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but wanted to start with more traditional kind of volunteers that we have in place. So we have around 2,000 registered volunteers within the fundraising side of stuff. So that doesn't include our retail volunteers or our caring services. And that's about half of our volunteer base that we have at Marie Curie. So I won't go into huge detail about each role, but we'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what the expectation is of each of these. So I'll start with the fundraising group member. So we currently have 325 fundraising groups across the UK. And it's been a really successful program for us at Marie Curie. It was launched back in 2011. And what we were trying to do was form a fundraising group in every community across the UK. And in its height, we had 500 fundraising groups in place, raising funds and awareness in their communities. And we were at that point quite specific about what we wanted our fundraising groups to cover in their area. We were very keen that they covered their local supermarket collection, that they covered their collection tins, that they put on at least one event a year. They supported us with check pickups and all that kind of thing. But nowadays we're much more flexible on that. And if there is a group that doesn't want to get involved in everything, we look at what opportunities there are and maybe recruit an individual community fundraising volunteer to support in that area. So trying already to be a bit more adaptable to the changing environment in which our groups are in. So our groups have raised over 46 million for Marie Curie since the programme launched, and they absolutely are a key component of our fundraising strategy. We absolutely couldn't do what we do without them. Within the 325 groups, we have just under 1,000 fundraising group members in total, and they still take on the bulk of the fundraising in their local communities in the way that suits them the most, where the most opportunities are. Some of those activities will be like, at the moment they're very busy supporting the Great Daffodil Appeal, particularly in Morrison's, because they're in our 2 weeks of Morrison's collections. They look after their collection tins, they look after their daffodil boxes. They organise their own events, from anything from a small coffee morning up to abseils, firewalks. You know, the breadth of the stuff that they do is incredible. But they're also our eyes and ears on the ground, so they're spotting opportunities for us and passing them on to the community fundraiser if it's not something they want to take forward themselves, and absolutely invaluable to us. So amazing to have them. We are still forming these groups in the communities, and we've got a piece of work that we're going to be doing in the next couple of months, where we still want to see the number of fundraising groups grow, but we absolutely see that they're not going to get, you know, they're not as they once were, and the type of volunteering people want to do is absolutely changing. So yeah, that's our fundraising group members. Then we have our collection box coordinators, which we call our CBCs. We have 700 CBCs across the UK, responsible for placing collection tins in the daffodil boxes. Again, we used to be quite strict on all our volunteers doing both, but some don't want to do the daffodil box, so we don't push them to do that anymore, and we might bring somebody else in to do them, or we just might not bother in an area if the income isn't as good. We're still seeing quite good recruitment to the CBC roles. And last year we saw 500,000 raised from this type of fundraising, so it's absolutely still a valuable role for us to have. That said, we don't see a huge growth from these as we move forward, and income is definitely down in comparison to pre-COVID times. One thing we do with our CBCs is do look for other things that they might be able to support in their community, particularly if we don't have a fundraising group in that area. So if they're able to help and want to do a little bit more with them being fully registered, we can look at those opportunities for them as well. So trying not to just keep them in the box of just that role, but if there's something else they might want to do, we can be quite adaptable with that. Student champion is a role we introduced pre-COVID as we look to engage with the younger audience at Marie Curie, because the majority demographic that support us is older. Our student champions are responsible for raising awareness of Marie Curie within their universities. Their primary role isn't fundraising, but more awareness raising within the student population, and engaging with other students and looking for the fundraising opportunities with them. It is an area traditionally that we've struggled a little bit with, and although we do have some great support, it's not widespread or consistent, and yeah, we've struggled a bit to generate interest, so we haven't prioritized it as much, but it is an opportunity we've got there should people want to get involved. A project support volunteer is less about delivering income and more about supporting the local teams in the offices, and at home now as well. So they would help with kind of a time-based project. So Great Daffodil Peel is a great example of that, where they're working on a short term on a key project. So they might be helping with calling supermarkets to get collection dates secured, and then calling the collectors, sorting out stock, things like that, just to get everything in place to support the team on the ground. We've identified some areas where we can really look into explore this opportunity a bit more and get a few more volunteers on board. So that's a bit of an exciting thing to look forward to going forward. And hopefully we'll see that evolve as we go on. Collection organizer, that's obviously a biggie at the moment for us with being in Daffodil Appeal and Morrison's Week. We have about 250 collection organisers whose role is to organise and coordinate our public collections across the UK. We have a real focus on increasing the collections we have and class them as hosted collections, so that those volunteers that collected in those stores have a really positive experience. And we see that, so we see a lot of our new volunteers come off the back of collecting, so we want to make sure that their collection experience is as good as it possibly could be, and it absolutely remains a key part to our fundraising. And we're looking to adapt some of our collection organiser roles while we've got the Morrison's partnership to make the most of that opportunity as well. Office volunteers, absolutely key to us getting everything done. They support the teams in a variety of ways, actually in the office, but also from home as well. We recognise some of the traditional income generated volunteers will likely reduce, and we know we need to adapt and develop the role so that volunteers can support income generation in the administration way, but one that suits their skills and passions. So we've got a variety of people in the office. I've got a volunteer in with us today who's fantastic with a computer, so it's wonderful having that support to us here. We've got some thoughts on how we can develop that through to into 25, 26. So watch this space. We'll hopefully have some developments there too. One that's not on the screen, but another one we have is our driver role. It's not a priority role for us, but it's there should one of our community fundraisers have a large patch that they're trying to cover, that we would recruit our drivers in to help with the teams locally with delivery of materials, collections of income, that kind of thing. And then we have speaker, which is so we have our speaker program, which sits within fundraising, because it was initially developed to raise funds from volunteers going out to speak with clubs, groups and associations. It hasn't developed that much from this, and we definitely want to refresh the speaker program to reach out to more people. But our speakers are trained to deliver talks about Marie Curie in their local communities. But we definitely need to grow the number that we have, and look for some new opportunities for them to get out, but also to support some of our caring services work as well, where we need to spread the word about companion and things like that. So there's quite a lot of opportunity for that to develop. And then the other one is just our event committee member. So this is where we recognised a gap between our fundraising groups, but also our special events committees. And there was like a gap where people weren't raising kind of that 25 to 50,000 pounds. So we've developed our event committee role to be looking at more of a one-off large-scale event a year. So whether that's a ball or a concert or something like that, that we have the event committee role in there as well. So, and that one we're probably a bit more picky about who we have in those roles. We'll get to know that person. We'd like them to have quite a big network that can draw in more people to support whatever they put on. So that's quite a new role to us. We do have an event committee set up in Liverpool, who have already done a couple of events. So it's something where we will continue to develop as we go forward. So that's our roles. So if I can go to the next slide, please, Mushka, then we can just talk a little bit about our other fundraising roles. I don't know if she's there. I'll start talking. So Rich, here we go. Rich mentioned just before about that we have other areas where supporters are involved with fundraising teams. Traditionally haven't been part of our remit. Somewhere we're quite keen to develop now that we're in our new structure. So just to start off with our fundraising My Way supporters, so they are our in aid of supporters, and we deem these as supporters that raise money off their own accord. We don't register them. They have support from their local community fundraiser and a clear supporter journey, but we don't have them as registered or take any responsibility for the events that they do. What we do try and do is link them up with their local fundraising groups where we have them, so they can provide extra stewardship, enhance their supporter journey. And then we actually do see some of our fundraising My Way supporters join our fundraising groups because they've had opportunity to build that relationship. But these are not supporters that we would sit within our fundraising volunteering remit. So it's just quite good to to mention that. So then the next group cluster of volunteers are ones that we class as our partially registered. And these are more that support us on a one-off event kind of thing during the year. They don't go through the full onboarding process. And it's more the people who are more wanting to do that flexible volunteering and those micro volunteering opportunities. And it's an area that we are still in the process of developing. We're not quite where we want to be with that at all. But this is the kind of where they would sit going forward. So our collectors, so just to give you an idea of our Great Daffodil Appeal collectors, we have around 8,000 collectors who give up a few hours of their time to collect at local collections. And obviously they're out there right now supporting at Morrison's and various other collections over the next few weeks. I know Rich has got his couple of collections booked in. I've got a collection I'm booked in to do some collecting at the end of March. And we see this as a real area where a volunteer joins Marie Curie for the first time. It can be their first kind of experience of doing any kind of volunteering. And we also see it as kind of the starting point for them to become a more regular volunteer as well. If they've particularly enjoyed their experience of collecting, they might then go along and meet their local fundraising group. They might ask their community fundraiser how they can get more involved with looking after collection tins, or even getting involved with the delivery of the events. So, and we ask where we have development areas, our community fundraisers, we ask them to kind of bring those collectors together after their collection as a bit of an engagement event, so they can hear more about what opportunities there are in the local area, just to kind of draw them in a little bit and see if we can get them involved. So we try our best to give them a really good collector experience in the hope that we'll get that repeat support going forward as well. Our event volunteers, so this is like cheer stations at London Marathon, like a lot of us have. We have our own events. Our Beat the Trails event series is gonna kick off in June. So we have people to help with registration in the morning, handing out medals, handing out a glass of fizz when people finish. And again, it increases the experience of those people taking part and raising money, and hopefully will then encourage them to take part again and raise a bit more money. Traditionally, these haven't sat in our remit, but we now have the responsibility for developing and have some quite exciting plans around event volunteering. And we're going to look to recruit a lot more and definitely get more people involved. And again, this is where the micro volunteering side of stuff is going to become quite useful to us in that respect. I don't, Rich, is there anything else you want to add around micro there, or have you got it later on?
There's a section later on about looking forward. I'll talk about it briefly.
I'll wait for them then. Then just a couple of others. I mentioned just for our special events volunteers, so they sit within our special events team and support stuff like our brain game series and our things like a private view events that we have down in London. We don't have anything to do with them, but the special events team really supported us with setting up our event committee role descriptions and things like that. So they've definitely helped us to word things to find the right people in that respect. And then finally, we've got our corporate volunteering. So they don't sit within our fundraising department here at Marie Curie, but it is an area we work really closely with to overlap on what we're doing. I won't go into huge detail around the corporate volunteering, but it's worth noting that we have a dedicated team member whose responsibility is to develop opportunities for our corporates and work with teams to generate these. So that is part of the volunteering roles. So anything you want to add to that, Rich?
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Katie. And I just thought there's quite a few questions coming through as well, as you've been talking to answer at the end.
Okay.
Some of that. Wonderful. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So yeah, so obviously Katie spoke about some of the roles that we had, and I realised when I sent this, the title of the slide is probably not perfect. I think maybe impact of fundraising volunteers would have been a better way to sort of word it. And while you were chatting, Katie, about the fundraiser group program, it made me think back to I formed my first group back in 2011. And much like children, I'm told, it's like when your first is always your favourite, which is not true. I joke. If my kids heard me say that, they'd kill me. But I still remember really vividly forming my first fundraising group when we launched a program years and years ago. And it was a South Hereford group. It was back in 2011. And the reason they sprung to mind was because on my Facebook memories this week, I had a picture of a little nappy bouquet that they had basically put together for me with like loads of little gifts for the baby. And it just, for me, like that's the value to us as individuals of some of our volunteers. Like there's that whole kind of personal side of it. And yes, they deliver huge impact to the charity, but it's the people they are. It's the energy they kind of bring to you as well as a fundraiser. And I think as much as I've not put that into this slide, it just made me think about it as you were talking. And I figured I should definitely say it. Okay, so yeah, so Katie's obviously told you we've got over 2,000 volunteers within our team. That's over half of all our volunteers at Marie Curie sit within fundraising. So straight away, when we're talking about impact and value, you can kind of see that there's such a key part of what we do. Like we couldn't deliver the services without any of our volunteers, but we wouldn't have the funds to deliver the services we do without those volunteers who are out there raising money for us. And we also know that we have a challenge coming, much like most charities within the sector, when that whole volunteer landscape is ever changing, and we know that we're expecting to see some declines in the number of volunteers literally out there doing those traditional roles. So we do need to think as we move forwards how we work around that and how we can adapt. When we're looking at money, which is obviously one of the key ways we always look at how successful something is, our volunteers are incredible. Yes, there's the groups that are delivered at £46 million, but last year across all of our fundraising volunteers, we raised just over £3.6 million. And that's from our groups, it's from our collection box coordinators, collection organisers. What that doesn't include is the people who are out there doing their 2-hour collection shift during Great Laughter Appeal or at Christmas time. It doesn't include the cheer station squads we have out at the London Marathon who are ensuring that those people taking part in those events are having the most amazing time and are more likely to support us moving forwards. So yes, there's £3.6 million, but actually it's so much more than that. And actually, when you look at that £3.6 million, that equates to around about generally about 18 to 20% of the overall income that we raise within community fundraising. So that's like a fifth of the income that comes in within the community, comes from our volunteers having a direct impact on that, which again is incredible. And whenever we talk to our community fundraising teams, we always try and get across that fact. It's like a fifth of your money is generally coming in from volunteers. So when you're thinking about how much time you should be investing in your volunteers, like take that into account, because we know it's much easier to retain what we have than it is to recruit new volunteers, especially right now and post-COVID. So yeah, it always amazes me just how much of an impact our volunteers have from a financial side. But I think actually it's equally as important to step away from the financial side of things and look at what else, whatever value that they bring. For us, especially with our fundraising groups and especially with those community volunteers, they can reach people and communities that we just can't. I think back to when I was a community fundraiser, I covered 3 pretty big counties, several of them that were very remote, and you'd often get stuck behind tractors when ever trying to get somewhere. We just can't reach those places, and to have volunteers who are advocates for what we do out in those areas talking about Marie Curie, reaching out to people is incredible. So they allow us to reach people. They're just the best advocate to your charity. And actually more so now when we have a smaller community fundraising team at Marie Curie. We went for a restructure last year, and like many charities have seen a reduction over the past probably 6-7 years in the size of our teams. that puts even more responsibility and expectation on those amazing people that we have out there. So yes, there's a money side, but I think equally our fundraising volunteers have traditionally offered us so much more than that. If we go to the next slide, please. And I very, very quickly, because I've just seen there is a few questions, I just wanted to leave some time to get onto that. Just wanted to talk about how that value compares to maybe what I did pre-COVID. So we've probably reduced in income. Pre-COVID, we'd be bringing in just over £5 million from our fundraising volunteers. So that is a significant drop. What I would say in terms of the positives of that is that actually year on year since COVID, we have seen that income increase ever so slightly each year, and it's kind of stuck around in the last 2 years the same amount. So we're seeing that as a real positive, that we've managed to get it back to better levels. But realistically, I'm not expecting us to be reaching those kind of pre-COVID income levels anytime soon. And we fully expect to be working in a very different way in the future. We've also seen a real decline in volunteer numbers. So I know we've spoken about having around about 2,000 volunteers in fundraising. It used to be nearer to probably 4,000. What I would say is a big reduction of that was probably when we did a real data push in terms of understanding who was actually still volunteering and who wasn't, and that saw a few volunteers drop away. COVID had a real huge impact, and I think that the general trends that are spoken about really often have further added to many of our volunteers stepping away. And I think our volunteers at Marie Curie, like many others, are from that older demographic. So we are seeing a lot of our groups that have been involved for 10, 15 years plus. COVID and even now, it's just been a natural time for them to step away and go with our blessing onto whatever else they're going on to. None of this, in terms of our reduction in numbers, in terms of the income, is a surprise. I remember being at a Marie Curie conference, I think back in 2019, and we spoke about how we fully expected our fundraiser group numbers to decline over the next 10 years. I think that decline has probably happened quicker than what we would have expected, purely because of the impact of COVID. But we knew that this was coming, and we kind of started to think about the things we could do before COVID hit, and kind of put a bit of a pin in that balloon somewhat. So yes, if we're happy to move on to the final slide, it just talks very briefly about looking forwards, because I think on one hand, we at Marie Curie are still going to continue to invest in the roles that we have. We still see value in those traditional roles, and we still want to retain the people that we have in them. I think, as I've mentioned, retention is much easier than recruitment. So part of our team's responsibility is to really work on how we can improve stewardship, how we can ensure volunteers have the right resources to do their roles. But as Katie said, how we can adapt some of those roles to make them more appealing and to remove some of the barriers that people may have around them. We also want to invest in recruitment into those current roles. We started to do some work recently that Katie's working on around some acquisition, and that's very much looking at very specific roles and doing recruitment out to warm supporters. So it's very targeted out to people that kind of fit the right acorn segment in terms of what makes a particular Marie Curie volunteer. And we're very direct, going out to them with a communication and letting them know we need their help in their local area, and encouraging them to sign up. Very much in the testing stages of that to see what kind of response we get. We've got 3 or 4 different plans this year for different roles, different areas, and different kind of mailings in terms of email, postal, and some text messages, just to see, because what we do know is that when you talk to most of our volunteers, the majority of them started off as a collector and then went on to do more. So we're just trying to learn about how we can reach these people, and how we can talk to them and try and move them up that ladder of participation, so that they're doing more for us and getting more engaged. Alongside that, micro-volunteering is a real key priority for us. We started to look at this before COVID hit, and then COVID kind of put a pin in that balloon, and it we've never got around to getting back into really pushing it forward, but it's obviously a massive trend across the sector. So many people already have brilliant micro-volunteering opportunities, and what we don't have at Marie Curie is the ability to do that. So we are going to be spending a lot of time working on that, and the aim is to get something going, because not only will it give people that flexible role, that flexible opportunity to be involved, but it also supports where we've already got people in post and doing roles for us. It really helps us with that supported journey, because it gives them really small ad hoc opportunities to stay engaged throughout the year, rather than just do their thing once a year or once every 2 or 3 months. Obviously, Katie's mentioned how we have our office volunteers and our project support volunteers, and we have some real exciting things we've got in the pipeline around how we can really engage those people into developing our Great Daffodil Appeal. At the moment, so much falls onto the community fundraisers, and they just don't have the time to be able to give the people we have involved in Daffodil Appeal the best possible experience. We know there are some brilliant volunteers who have the right skills who would be willing to get involved and supporting us with that. So we've got some real plans around that. And finally, horizon scanning. And I think it's really exciting that Katie and I have much more time to be able to talk to different organisations, and we've both spent quite a lot of time recently having conversations about different areas of fundraising with different charities. And it's really insightful, and it's really reassuring to talk to different people and hear the same kind of like challenges and share some of these successes. And as part of that, I know Mishka mentioned we have a fundraising volunteer managers network meeting, and that's just like a bi-monthly meeting where people who are involved in fundraising volunteering come together, and we kind of have a chance to network, and we talk about many different things. We've had one around young volunteers. We've spoken about micro volunteering before. It's just a really good opportunity. So again, if anyone is or wants to be part of that, then please do reach out to me, because we are more than happy to have new people come on board. It's very fundraising volunteer focused, but it's just a chance to kind of chat to your peers, really. And on the final slide is just our email addresses, just in case you want to note them down. And like I said, we are always more than willing to kind of chat to people about stuff and share any of our learnings as well.
Thank you so much, Richard and Katie, really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, maybe I'll CC you in the follow-up email so that people can contact you if that's okay.
That's fine.
A lot of food for thought, I must say. I've been writing down all my notes on my Volunteero notepad, and we do have a lot of questions to get through, so I hope you're buckled in and ready for some. Obviously the questions are also open to the floor, so if anyone wants to ask a question direct, that's also okay. So without saying, you know, when you mention micro volunteering, event volunteering, ambassador volunteering, Volunteero can definitely support on this. We are great with micro volunteering, that quick action to an app. You know, you mentioned the small ad hoc opportunities. So if anyone does want to find out more about Volunteero, feel free to contact me. Let's get to the questions. We're going to start off strong with Ashley's question, which I think is a great question. So if you were to start all over again, knowing what you know now, what would you focus on? So Ashley, they don't currently have any fundraising roles, so have time to think. So they have time to think and plan. So imagine you were starting from scratch. What would you focus on?
I read the question whilst Katie was talking, and I did think to myself, that's a brilliant question. And so I've been trying to think of an answer as Katie was talking. One thing I would definitely say is I would still look the way we've gone. So I'd still look to focus on some of those traditional roles, because I see real value in fundraising groups. I see real value in forming them still. I think if we're starting again, we would make them much less formal. We would I guess we'd look at ways that we could remove that whole barrier of people not wanting to necessarily be in committees as we see committees. And try and make it a bit simpler to get involved in them. I think if we're starting again now, we would definitely invest more in those kind of ad hoc opportunities from the offset. So we're doing more micro volunteering. I think not only is that flexible role that people are looking for, but much like our daffodil appeal collectors, it's their first step on the journey. I think the beauty of the micro volunteering and those smaller ones is it gives people a chance to test out the charity as well, and kind of how much you show value to them, how much you support them. So I think it's giving you that. I think is it Chris who's been on these calls before, he talked about the ladder of participation quite a lot. And it's true, like you want people to get on that first rung of the ladder, and then it's about how you move them along it. And it's not going straight in and being, can you give up all your time to be in a fundraising group? It's giving people smaller bite-sized chunks. But I still would really advocate fundraising groups. Like they're a huge part of our success. Randomly, before I even came on this, I had an email from someone I used to work with who's about to form their first fundraising group. So we know they still work. We know they still happen. But that was as quick as I came up with an answer. Katie, did you have anything else that you would do differently?
Yeah, I don't think I'd do anything differently, but I think like take advantage of the people that you already have warm to your charity. So we used to always call it low-hanging fruit. So the people that are really warm to you in your communities, that are maybe like the movers and shakers in that community, that can really help to introduce you to other people that can support you, and then have that as a starting point. I think that's absolutely key, rather than going in cold. Get to know what your warm supporters want to get involved in first, and then they can help you spread the word in a particular area.
That's true. And actually, off the back of that, don't focus on everywhere. Like we were like, when we were CFs, me and Katie targeted with 5 or 6 new groups a year. Just focus on the places you know you've got support. Like sometimes there's no point being, we're going to try and do it everywhere. It's like, actually, where do we have people? Where is there a service? Where is there the low-hanging fruit that Katie talks about? And go from there, because it's about using your energy in the right places. That's what's worked for us traditionally as we've changed the way we do things.
Yeah, especially like start small, maybe run a few pilots around. Particularly, I think, going partially, using your terms of registered or partially register a volunteer, and then maybe they will go into a fully registered volunteer too, and do other things. Which leads me on to the next question, which surprised me about your setup, because Richard, you mentioned my LinkedIn post about where should they be sitting, and it's interesting you don't sit with the traditional volunteering. You do sit with in the fundraising team, the fundraising volunteering. So Natalia wants to know what do you see as the crossover or overlap between some of the fundraising and retail volunteer roles? So do you go to the volunteer team, the traditional volunteers, and say, come to fundraising, and to fundraising, say, you go to fundraising volunteers and say, oh, we got retail volunteering opportunities? Like, how do you guys mix?
I think we're getting better at this. I think Marie Curie traditionally, like a lot of organizations potentially, used to be quite siloed, and we used to be quite protective over our volunteers. It's my volunteer, you can't have them. I like to think that's really starting to change. And yes, we are different in terms of different departments, but we still work closely together. So we would talk to other departments about different opportunities. An example being our companion volunteers. This doesn't answer the retail one, but it kind of gets the point across. We promote those opportunities to our fundraising volunteers in terms of, you may be interested in this opportunity. You may be interested in that opportunity. With retail, I was on a call the other day with somebody, and I cannot for the life of me remember who. And there'd been some research done in their organization that highlighted that actually retail volunteers, all volunteers, are much more unlikely to cross over from being within a shop into different areas of an organization, which I found quite interesting. And I have no evidence to back that up at all. It was somebody else's statement backed on some research they had done. But we do try and engage our retail volunteers, but again, more usually with kind of collecting. So come Great Daffodil Appeal, we'll be going out to the shops and trying to engage them and get them involved, and asking their volunteers to do a collection. when I mentioned a minute ago that we're going to be doing some of our acquisition emails, one of them will be around retail. So what we will be testing is going out to some of our warm supporters, and equally to some of our other volunteers to say, we have Marie Curie shops in your area. Would you want to get involved? Because we know that we're struggling for retail volunteers and we lose quite a few days across the year from a shop. And I think it costs us around about £250,000 in terms of closed days and shops. So we know that it's an area we want to support our team with. So although it's not our responsibility, so to speak, we are still trying to see how we can use other volunteers to kind of support with that. I don't know if that answers your question at all. I think it kind of does. But I guess the crux is we try and work across teams as much as we can.
I think that works really well. And that's an interesting statistic about retail volunteers are less likely to move over to fundraising.
I know. I need to find out who. I'm going to find out who it was and try and get more information, and then try and share it with people.
Yeah. Victoria asked about, do you have any formal role descriptions for all fundraising roles, both registered and partially registered?
Yes, is a quick answer to that. So yeah, so the registered ones really are the ones where we've got the formal roles. The partially ones, not so much a role description. It would more be like a brief like template which we might put on social media, like come and collect for us or join a cheer station. But it's not because they're not signing up to an actual role and they're not going through checks. We wouldn't have a formal role description for it. It's more of an ad hoc description of what we want from them.
And how much, someone actually direct messaged me this question, how much of a role do fundraising projects like tea and cake days, dress down days, etc., play in fundraising group activities to raise funds / encourage participation?
As in how much do our groups do those events?
Yeah, or how much does it maybe, is it a really important part to your fundraising strategy, your community fundraising?
Sorry, I'm just getting the question right. So is the events the groups do a key part to our strategy? Or is a huge part really. Like as we said, like last year was around about 3.6 million, 2.7 I believe came from fundraising groups. So it's a real key part, that the budgets that we have set on our kind of 5-year plan in terms of fundraising groups' own events, which kind of fit into those kind of tea parties, dress down days that you mentioned, they're kind of going upwards. So we need to engage our groups even more in those events. And again, part of our team's role is to kind of identify the events that are traditionally happening and then trying to make those easier for groups to do by kind of creating little packs to help them and that kind of stuff. So they are a key part. And I think they'll always be a key part, because not only are they fundraising, but it's also by having that within their communities. Our groups use those to recruit new members. They use them to kind of reach out to new people. They kind of work so well in terms of just, again, spreading the word about what we're doing.
I didn't even realize the time. We're only 3 minutes away till 3 o'clock. So I'm just going to ask one more. There's actually really interesting conversations going on in the chat about your retail volunteering not crossing over anywhere else, and Colin agrees with you, and yeah, interesting stuff. Just one more question, because I think it's something that's quite important, is how do you deal with the reputational risk associated with informal fundraising communities?
So when you say, so I guess we don't have informal fundraising communities as such. Like when we say informal, there's still people that have gone through a form of registration. So that would be a prime example. Our collectors, they would still sign up. They would still give us their details. They would still give us their next of kin. But what we wouldn't do is put them through a reference check, because they're literally doing 2 hours collection at any one time. Any of our volunteers that are kind of handling money in terms of taking it away and banking it, any of them are handling data, they would all have to go through like the same checks, so your data protection, cash handling, all of those things. So we're proper risk averse at Marie Curie. It's so hard to get anything past our compliance teams. So we are really confident in terms of the kind of structures that we have, and no volunteer would kind of be put out to do anything that would put any risk on either them or anyone that they're dealing with, but equally on, I guess, the reputation of Marie Curie.
Brilliant. I just want to say thank you so much. I know we're run. I was so excited that I didn't even realize the time. So I just want to say thank you so much for both of your time, Richard and Katie. I think we can talk about this for another hour easily, but we are running out of time. So I just want to say thank you so much. I will copy you into the follow-up emails if anyone does want to contact you. I hope that's okay.
That's fine, thank you.
And I will share the Fundraising Volunteer Managers Network as well, which I think is just contacting you, isn't it?
Yes.
And you also have a WhatsApp group that people can join to and ask questions. So yeah, thank you very much, Richard and Katie, and hopefully see you at the next one.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.